The wedding dress hung in the corner of the stage coach like a ghost, its white lace catching the fading afternoon light as Delilah Sutton pressed herself against the opposite side of the bench, watching the shadows lengthen across the Colorado landscape. She had traveled 3 weeks from Philadelphia to reach Denver City in this year of 1867, each mile carrying her further from everything familiar and closer to a marriage arranged by letters and desperation. The mountains rose before them like jagged teeth against the sky, and she knew that soon darkness would fall, bringing with it the terror that had plagued her since childhood. "We will need to stop soon," the driver called down. Town is still 5 hours ahead, and these mountain roads are not safe after dark. Delilah's hands began to shake. The thought of night falling, of being trapped in darkness even for a few hours, sent her heart racing. She had written to her intended, Thomas Mercer, about many things, but never about this weakness. How could she explain to a stranger that she could not bear to be in darkness, that the absence of light made her feel as though she were drowning, suffocating, disappearing? "Please," she called up, her voice tight, "can we not continue? I have lanterns. I will pay extra." "No amount of money makes those roads safe at night, miss. There is a trading post another mile ahead. We will shelter there." The stage coach lurched forward, and Delilah tried to steady her breathing. She could manage this. She had managed before. She would simply stay awake, keep a candle burning, and endure until dawn as she had done countless times throughout her 22 years of life. The trading post appeared as the sun touched the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that would soon give way to the darkness she dreaded. It was a rough structure of logs and stone, with smoke rising from a chimney and a few horses tied outside. The driver helped her down, and she clutched her small bag to her chest, leaving the wedding dress and trunk to be unloaded. "They have rooms upstairs," he said. "Simple but clean. We leave at first light." Delilah nodded and made her way inside, where the proprietor, a grizzled man with kind eyes, showed her to a small room with a narrow bed and a single window. She immediately surveyed her supplies. She had 3 candles, a small oil lamp with enough fuel for perhaps 6 hours, and matches. It would have to be enough. As darkness fell outside, she lit the lamp and 1 candle, placing them strategically around the room. The shadows still pressed in at the corners, making her skin crawl, but she sat on the bed and tried to read from the small Bible she carried. The words blurred before her eyes as exhaustion from 3 weeks of travel weighed on her. She must have dozed because she woke with a start to find the lamp had burned low and the candle had guttered out. Panic seized her immediately. The room was heavy with darkness, the small flame in the lamp barely holding back the black that seemed to have weight and presence. She fumbled for matches with shaking hands and knocked the box to the floor, hearing them scatter across the wooden boards. A sob escaped her throat as she dropped to her hands and knees, searching blindly. The lamp flickered and died. Complete darkness enveloped her, and she could not breathe, could not think, could only feel the terror rising like a wave that would surely drown her. She heard herself making small, desperate sounds as she crawled across the floor, searching for matches, for anything. Then she heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy and measured. A knock at her door made her gasp. "Miss, I heard something fall. Are you all right?" The voice was deep, rough-edged but not unkind. "Please," she managed, her voice breaking. "Please, I need light, I need." She heard him try the door, which she had locked. "I am going to open this door, miss. Step back." There was a heavy thud and the door swung open. Golden light flooded the room from the lamp he carried, and Delilah looked up from the floor to see a man filling the doorway. He was massive, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span the frame. His hair was brown and reached past his collar, and a thick beard covered much of his face. But his eyes, dark and steady, held only concern as he looked down at her. "The lamp went out," she said, feeling foolish and exposed, still on her hands and knees in her traveling dress. "I dropped the matches." He stepped into the room, setting his lamp on the small table, and the light pushed the shadows back to where they belonged in corners and beneath furniture. He knelt beside her, and she could see the size of him more clearly now, the thick muscles of his arms visible beneath his rolled-up shirt sleeves, the broad chest and powerful build of a man who worked hard in unforgiving country. "Here," he said, picking up several matches from the floor and handing them to her. His hands were large and calloused, scarred from work and weather. "Let me get your lamp working again." He moved with surprising efficiency for such a large man, checking the lamp's fuel reservoir and wick. "Empty," he said. "Wait here." He left, taking the terror-inducing darkness with him as he carried away his lamp. Delilah clutched the matches and tried to calm her racing heart. She had never felt so humiliated. What would this stranger think of her? A grown woman reduced to panic by simple darkness. He returned within minutes with a can of oil and proceeded to refill her lamp. "This should last the night now," he said, lighting it and adjusting the flame until it burned steady and bright. Then he gathered her candles and relit them as well. "You are afraid of the dark." It was not a question, and his tone held no judgment, only statement of fact. "Yes," she whispered. "Since I was a child, I know it is foolish. Fear is not foolish if it is real to the one who feels it." He stood, and she realized she was still on the floor. He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His grip was firm and warm as he helped her to her feet with such ease that she might have weighed nothing at all. "I am Benjamin Zimmerman," he said. "I live up in the mountains, about 10 miles north. I came down for supplies and was planning to head back at dawn, but if you need someone to keep watch, to make sure the light stays burning, I can stay tonight." "I could not ask that of you," Delilah said, though the relief at the thought was almost overwhelming. "You do not even know me. You are a woman alone and frightened. That is all I need to know." He moved toward the door. "I will be right outside. If any lamp starts to fade, I will tend to it." "You should sleep." "Wait," she said. "What do you mean you live in the mountains? Alone, I have a cabin. I trap and hunt, trade furs and meat. It is a good life, quiet." He paused. "Lonely sometimes, but good. Mr. Zimmerman, I cannot ask you to give up your sleep for a stranger." "You did not ask," I offered, "and I am used to keeping watch. In the mountains, you learn to sleep light and wake often. This is no hardship." His eyes held hers for a moment, and she saw something in them that made her believe him. "Get some rest, Miss Sutton, Delilah Sutton, Miss Sutton. Rest. The light will not go out." He left the door slightly ajar, and she could see him settle against the wall in the hallway, his long legs stretched out before him. True to his word, every hour or so throughout that long night, she heard him rise and move about, checking lamps, adjusting wicks. And knowing he was there, knowing the light would not fail, she finally slept. Dawn came gray and cold, and Delilah woke to find Benjamin gone but her lamp still burning. She rose and dressed quickly, braiding her long dark hair and pinning it up before venturing downstairs. The trading post was busy with morning activity, and she found Benjamin at a table eating breakfast. He stood when he saw her. "Miss Sutton, I trust you slept well, better than I have in weeks, thanks to you." She hesitated. "May I join you, please?" They sat, and the proprietor brought her coffee and cornmeal mush with bacon. For a few minutes, they ate in comfortable silence. In the morning light, she could see Benjamin more clearly. He was perhaps 28 or 30, with weathered skin that spoke of years outdoors and lines around his eyes from squinting against sun and snow. His clothes were simple but well made, the shirt and trousers of thick wool, sturdy boots that had seen hard use but were carefully maintained. Everything about him spoke of capability and strength. "You are traveling to Denver City?" he asked. "Yes, I am to be married." The words felt strange in her mouth. "To Thomas Mercer. He owns a mercantile there. We have been corresponding for 6 months." Something flickered across Benjamin's face, but it was gone before she could identify it. "I see. And he is expecting you." "Yes, though I am a few days late. The stage was delayed in Kansas." She wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup. "Mr. Zimmerman, I want to thank you properly for last night. You showed me great kindness." "No thanks needed. But I admit, I am curious. How will you manage when you are married? Will your husband understand about the darkness?" The question struck at the heart of her deepest fear. "I do not know. I have not told him. I hoped." She trailed off, unsure how to explain her desperate hope that somehow in a new place with a new life the fear might simply disappear. Benjamin's expression was grave. "You should tell him. A marriage should not begin with secrets, especially ones that matter. And what if he decides he does not want a wife who is so weak? I have no other prospects, Mr. Zimmerman. My family is dead. I have no money and no means to support myself. This marriage is my only option." "Being afraid of the dark is not weakness," Benjamin said firmly. "And any man worth marrying would understand that." The stage driver called out that they were preparing to leave, and Delilah stood reluctantly. Part of her wished she could stay in this moment, with this kind stranger who had kept the darkness at bay and asked for nothing in return. "Thank you again," she said. "I will not forget your kindness. Safe travels, Miss Sutton." He stood as well, towering over her. "I hope you find happiness in Denver City." She made her way outside and climbed into the stage coach, and as they pulled away, she looked back to see Benjamin standing in front of the trading post, watching them go. Something in her chest ached at the sight, but she turned forward, toward the life that waited for her. Denver City was loud and crowded and overwhelming after weeks of prairie and mountains. The stage deposited her at the hotel where Thomas had arranged for her to stay, and she sent word to him of her arrival. He came within the hour, a neat man in his mid-30s with thinning hair and a precise manner of moving and speaking. "Miss Sutton at last," he said, looking her over with an appraising eye that made her feel like merchandise. "I was beginning to worry. You are well." "The journey was not too difficult. I am well, thank you. And you are Mr. Mercer, indeed. Please, shall we sit? We have much to discuss." They sat in the hotel's small parlor, and Thomas outlined his expectations for their marriage with the same precision he likely used to inventory his store. She would manage the household, entertain his business associates when necessary, provide him with children. In return, she would have security and respectability. "There is one thing I must tell you," Delilah said when he paused. Her heart was pounding, but Benjamin's words echoed in her mind. "A marriage should not begin with secrets. I have a fear of darkness. I need lamps burning throughout the night. I know it seems foolish, but it is something I cannot control." Thomas frowned. "You are afraid of the dark at your age?" "Yes." He was silent for a long moment, and she watched his face as he calculated this information, weighing it against whatever benefits he saw in their arrangement. "Well," he said finally, "I suppose it is not insurmountable, though you will need to overcome it eventually. I cannot have my wife displaying such childish fears in front of our children or guests." The dismissal in his tone stung, but she nodded. This was the bargain she had made when she agreed to come west to marry a stranger. "The wedding is arranged for 3 days from now," Thomas continued. "That should give you time to rest and prepare. I have engaged a seamstress to make any necessary alterations to your dress. 3 days. In 3 days, She would marry this man who looked at her fear as a flaw to be corrected rather than something to be understood. She thought of Benjamin's steady eyes, his simple acceptance, the way he had kept vigil without making her feel weak for needing it. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparations. The seamstress took in her wedding dress, making it fit her frame, which had grown thinner during the journey west. Thomas's sister, Margaret, called on her and proved to be a kind woman with a practical manner, though she made it clear she thought Delilah was fortunate to be marrying her brother. "Thomas is very particular," Margaret said as they took tea. "He likes things just so. But he is fair and a good provider." "I am grateful for the opportunity," Delilah said, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. That night, alone in her hotel room, she lay awake despite her exhaustion. She had lamps burning as always, but the fear felt closer somehow, pressing in. In 3 days, she would be married. In 3 days, her life would be set on its course, and somewhere in the mountains north of here, Benjamin Zimmerman was in his lonely cabin, and she wondered if he ever thought about the frightened woman he had helped for no reason other than simple kindness. On the morning of the 3rd day, her wedding day, Delilah woke before dawn with a feeling she could not name sitting heavy in her chest. She dressed carefully in her wedding gown, and Margaret arrived to help with her hair. The ceremony was to be at 2 in the afternoon at the small church Thomas attended. At noon, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, expecting Margaret or perhaps the minister, she found instead a hotel clerk with a note. "This just arrived for you, miss." She took it with trembling fingers and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was rough but clear. "Miss Sutton, I have no right to write to you on your wedding day, but I cannot let you marry without saying what has been in my mind since you left. You deserve more than a man who sees your fear as weakness. You deserve someone who will keep the fires burning for you every night without being asked, who will stand between you and the darkness until you learn you are strong enough to face it yourself. You deserve to be treasured, not tolerated. I know I am only a mountain man with little to offer compared to a prosperous merchant, but if you would consider it, I would count it the greatest honor of my life to be the man who keeps your nights bright and your heart safe. If you feel nothing for me, forgive this intrusion and accept my wishes for your happiness. But if there is any chance you might feel as I do, I am staying at the boarding house on Market Street. I will wait until 2 o'clock. After that, I will return to the mountains and trouble you no more. Benjamin Zimmerman. Delilah's hands shook so hard she nearly dropped the note. She read it again, then a 3rd time, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Benjamin had come back. He was here in Denver City. And he was offering her something she had not dared to hope for: acceptance, protection, and what sounded very much like love. But Thomas was expecting her at the church in 2 hours. Guests were gathering. She had no money, no way to support herself if she did not marry Thomas. It would be madness to throw away security for a man she had known for only 1 night. Except, it would not be madness. It would be the first brave thing she had done in her entire careful, fearful life. She looked at Margaret, who had been reading over her shoulder and now met her eyes with understanding. "Go," Margaret said softly. "I saw the way Thomas spoke to you. He would never be unkind, but he would never truly see you either. If this man does, then go. But I cannot just leave. I must explain to Thomas, apologize. I will tell him. He will be angry, but he will recover. Men like my brother always do. Now go, before you lose your nerve." Delilah gathered her few belongings, moving in a daze. She left the wedding dress hanging on the wardrobe door, a ghost of the life she was choosing not to live. Within 15 minutes, she was hurrying down the street in her traveling clothes, her bag clutched in one hand and Benjamin's note in the other. The boarding house on Market Street was a simple, clean establishment. She found Benjamin in the small parlor, sitting with his hands clasped between his knees, staring at the floor. He looked up when she entered, and the hope that blazed in his eyes made her breath catch. "You came," he said, standing. "I came," she repeated, and then she was crossing the room and he was meeting her halfway and his arms came around her, solid and safe and strong. "I will keep the fires burning," he said against her hair, "every single night for the rest of our lives. I promise you this." "I believe you," she whispered. And she did. They were married the next morning by a judge who asked no questions about the man who had been left waiting at a church the day before. Benjamin placed a simple gold band on her finger, and when he kissed her, gentle and reverent, she felt something unlock in her chest that had been closed for so long she had forgotten it was there. "We should go," Benjamin said, "before your intended comes looking for you." They gathered their belongings and left Denver City, heading north into the mountains. Benjamin had 2 horses, his own large stallion and a gentle mare he had purchased that morning for Delilah. They rode through the afternoon, climbing higher into the peaks, and Delilah felt the noise and pressure of the city fall away with each mile. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Delilah felt the familiar anxiety creeping in. Benjamin seemed to sense it because he reached over and took her hand. "We are almost there," he said. "And when we arrive, you will see, you never have to fear the dark in my home." The cabin appeared as twilight deepened, a sturdy structure of logs set in a clearing with mountains rising behind it. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as they approached, Delilah saw something that made her gasp. All around the cabin, set at intervals of perhaps 10 feet, were tall posts. Atop each post was an oil lamp, and every single one was burning, creating a ring of light around the home. The windows of the cabin itself glowed warmly, and she could see lamps inside as well. "I came back 2 days ago and prepared it," Benjamin said quietly. "I wanted you to see that I meant what I promised." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she took in the sight. He had done this for her. This man she barely knew had created a haven of light because he understood what she needed. They dismounted and Benjamin helped her down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. He showed her inside, and the cabin was simple but welcoming. One large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a good stove, a table and chairs. A door led to a bedroom, and when she looked inside, she saw more lamps, their wicks trimmed and ready, extra oil stored in neat rows on a shelf. "It is not grand," Benjamin said, a note of uncertainty in his voice. "Not what a merchant could offer you." "It is perfect," Delilah said, turning to look at him. "You are perfect." He stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I am not perfect. I am rough and simple, but I will love you, Delilah. I started falling in love with you that first night, watching you face your fear. And I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you know you are treasured." She rose on her toes and kissed him, and this time there was more heat in it, more promise. His arms wrapped around her, lifting her easily, and she felt the solid strength of him, the protection he offered. That night, their wedding night, Benjamin kept his promise. He tended the fire in the hearth until it blazed bright and warm. He lit every lamp in the cabin. And when they lay together in the bed, when he loved her with a tenderness and passion that took her breath away, she could see his face in the golden light, could see the love in his eyes as he made her his wife in truth. Afterwards, as she lay in his arms, safe and sated and happier than she had ever been, he traced patterns on her shoulder and spoke softly. "Tomorrow, I will teach you how to tend the lamps yourself, and the fire. You will learn that you can keep the darkness away with your own hands." "I am afraid I will always need the light," she admitted. Then you will always have it. But you are stronger than you know, Delilah, and I will be here as you discover that strength." She fell asleep to the sound of his heartbeat, steady and sure, and the crackle of the fire. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not fear the night. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Delilah's life. Benjamin taught her the rhythms of mountain living, how to read the weather in the sky and the behavior of animals, how to smoke meat and preserve vegetables. He taught her to ride better, to move through the forest quietly, to appreciate the vast silence broken only by wind and water and wildlife. And true to his word, he kept the fires burning. Every evening, as darkness approached, he would go around the cabin lighting the exterior lamps, building up the fire, ensuring she was surrounded by light. But he also, gradually and gently, began to teach her to do it herself. "See how the wick needs to be trimmed just so," he said one evening, guiding her hands. "And the oil level checked. If you know how to care for the lamps, you know you can always keep them burning." She learned. And slowly, very slowly, the fear began to lose some of its grip. It was still there, still real, but knowing that Benjamin was beside her, that he would wake in the night if a lamp guttered and needed tending, gave her the security to start facing it. A month after their marriage, an early autumn storm rolled through, fierce and sudden. The wind howled around the cabin, rattling the shutters. Benjamin had brought all the exterior lamps inside before the weather hit, and they burned brightly in the main room while rain lashed the windows. "I need to check the horses," Benjamin said, pulling on his heavy coat. "They are in the shelter, but I want to make sure they are not spooked." "I will come with you," Delilah said, but he shook his head. "Too dangerous. Trees are falling out there. Stay inside where it is safe and warm." He kissed her forehead. "I will be back before you can miss me." He went out into the storm, and Delilah sat by the fire, trying not to worry. But minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and the wind seemed to grow worse. Then, with a tremendous crash that made her scream, something struck the cabin. The entire structure shook, and one of the windows shattered inward. Wind and rain poured through, and in seconds, half the lamps were extinguished. Panic rose in her throat as the room was plunged into semi-darkness, lit only by the fire and two remaining lamps. She grabbed for matches with shaking hands, trying to relight the closest lamp, but her hands were trembling too badly. "No," she whispered. "No, please." The darkness pressed in, seeming to grow with each gust of wind through the broken window. And Benjamin was still outside, and what if he was hurt? What if something had happened? What if she was alone in the dark forever? Then she heard his voice in her memory, steady and sure. "You are stronger than you know." She forced herself to take a breath. Then another. She looked at the matches in her hand, at the lamp before her. She could do this. She had watched Benjamin do it dozens of times. She had done it herself under his guidance. Her hand still shook, but she managed to light a match. She touched it to the wick of the lamp, adjusting it as she had been taught until it caught and held. Light bloomed, pushing back the darkness a little. She moved to the next lamp and the next, relighting them one by one. By the time Benjamin burst back through the door, soaked and worried, she had every lamp burning and was nailing a piece of oilcloth over the broken window. "Delilah," he crossed to her in 2 strides, his hands running over her as if checking for injury. "Are you all right? I heard the crash." "A tree came down on the roof, but it looks like it just clipped the corner." "I am fine," she said, and she realized it was true. "The lamps went out, but I relit them." He stilled, then pulled back to look at her face. "You did?" "Yes, I was frightened, but I did it anyway." She managed a shaky smile. "You were right. I am stronger than I knew." The pride and love in his eyes made her heart swell. He pulled her close, heedless of his wet clothes, and held her tight. "You are the bravest person I know," he said into her hair. "I am not brave." I am terrified of something as simple as darkness. Bravery is not the absence of fear, Benjamin said. It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear, and you did that tonight. They worked together to secure the cabin against the storm, and when they finally went to bed, exhausted, Benjamin wrapped himself around her like a shield. The fire burned bright, the lamps glowed steady, and outside the storm raged on. But inside, she was safe. Inside, she was home. As autumn deepened and the first snows began to dust the mountain peaks, Delilah discovered she was with child. She had suspected for a few weeks, but the confirmation from the midwife in the settlement 4 miles away made it real. Benjamin's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around, laughing with pure joy. "A child," he kept saying, "our child." But that night, as they lay in bed, she saw worry creep into his expression. "What is it?" she asked. "The baby will come in late spring," he said. "That is a good time." "But Delilah, when the child is here, there will be times when I need to be away, hunting or trading. Times when you might be alone with the darkness." "I know," she said quietly. The same fear had been gnawing at her. What kind of mother could she be if she could not even face the night without terror? "We will work on it," Benjamin said firmly. "We have months, and you have already come so far. That night in the storm, you proved you can do this." He was right. She had come far. But she had a long way yet to go. Winter closed in around the cabin, and the world turned white. Benjamin kept the path clear to the barn where the horses and goats sheltered, and he checked his trap lines regularly, bringing home rabbit and beaver and fox. Delilah learned to make soap and candles from the tallow, adding to their store of light, and every evening, without fail, Benjamin lit the lamps and built up the fire. But he also began to step back, letting her do more of it herself. At first, he would stand beside her, talking her through each step. Then he would watch from across the room. Then one day he waited in the bedroom while she tended to the lamps alone. She did it, though her heart raced and her hands shook. And when she was done, when every lamp burned bright and the fire crackled high, she felt a surge of pride. "I did it," she called, and Benjamin emerged from the bedroom, his face split in a wide smile. "You did," he confirmed. "I knew you could." There were still hard nights. Nights when the fear was too strong and she needed him beside her, needed his steady presence to keep the panic at bay. But there were also nights when she could tend the lamps herself, when she could bank the fire and climb into bed knowing that if it burned low, she could wake and fix it. The child growing inside her became more real with each passing week. She felt the first flutters of movement in January, during a blizzard that lasted 3 days and left them snowed in but cozy. Benjamin's hand on her belly, feeling the baby move for the first time, brought tears to both their eyes. "I want to be strong for this child," Delilah whispered. "I do not want to pass my fear on." "You will be strong for our child because you already are strong," Benjamin said. "And if the baby needs light to sleep, so what? There are worse things in this world than a mother who keeps the darkness away." In February, Benjamin had to go down to the settlement for supplies, a trip that would take him overnight. He prepared everything before he left, stacking extra wood by the fire, filling every lamp to the brim, leaving detailed instructions Delilah did not really need anymore. "I do not want to leave you," he said, his hands on her shoulders. "But we need flour and salt, and I need to trade the furs before spring." "I will be fine," Delilah said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. An entire night alone. She had not been alone in darkness since that terrible night at the trading post before she met Benjamin. "I will be back by tomorrow evening," he promised. "Keep the fires burning. You know how to do this." He left at dawn, and Delilah went about her day trying to stay busy. She baked bread, mended clothes, carded wool. But as afternoon faded toward evening, the anxiety began to build. She started the process early, before the sun had even set. She lit every lamp, built the fire high, checked and double-checked everything. Then she sat by the hearth with her knitting, working on a blanket for the baby, and tried not to watch the windows as they turned from gray to black. The night settled in, deep and complete. The wind whistled around the cabin and the fire popped and crackled. Delilah worked on her knitting, then read from the Bible, then simply sat and watched the flames. Around midnight, she realized something. She was alone in the night, yes. But she was not helpless. The lamps were burning because she had lit them. The fire was warm because she had built it. And she was safe in this cabin that Benjamin had made ready for her, surrounded by the evidence of his love in every stocked lamp and piece of firewood. She stood and went to the window, looking out at the star-strewn sky. The darkness was still there, vast and deep, but it no longer felt like it would swallow her. It was simply the absence of light, and light was something she knew how to make. When Benjamin returned the next evening, exhausted from the long trip, he found her sitting calmly by the fire, the baby blanket nearly finished in her lap. "You are all right?" he asked, searching her face. "I am more than all right," she said. "I was afraid, but I managed. All night long I kept the fires burning. And Benjamin, I realized something. I was not keeping the darkness away. I was making light. There is a difference." He pulled her up into his arms, mindful of her growing belly, and kissed her deeply. "I am so proud of you," he said. "So incredibly proud." Spring came gradually to the mountains, the snow melting in patches, revealing muddy earth and the first green shoots. Delilah's belly grew round and full, and the baby seemed to somersault inside her. Benjamin became even more protective, hovering whenever she stood on a stool to reach something or bent to lift a heavy pot. "I am with child, not made of glass," she teased one afternoon as he rushed to take a basket of laundry from her hands. "You are carrying the most precious thing in the world," he said. "Let me fuss." The midwife, a capable woman named Ruth who lived in the settlement, came to check on Delilah in early May. "Another few weeks," she said. "Everything looks good. Send Benjamin to fetch me when your time comes." But when Delilah's time did come, 2 weeks later, it came fast. Her water broke just after dawn, and the contractions started hard and close together. Benjamin saddled his horse in record time and rode for Ruth, but it was a 4-mile trip each way. Delilah labored alone for the first hour, using the techniques Ruth had taught her, breathing through the pain. It was frightening, but she found that focusing on each moment, each breath, kept the fear manageable. This was like learning to tend the lamps. One step, then another, then another. Benjamin burst back through the door with Ruth close behind, and after that, everything became a blur of pain and effort, and finally, just after noon, a baby's cry. "A boy," Ruth announced, placing the squalling, red-faced infant on Delilah's chest. "A big, healthy boy." Delilah looked down at her son, this tiny person she and Benjamin had made, and felt love so fierce it was almost frightening. Benjamin knelt beside the bed, his large hand gentle on the baby's head, tears streaming down his face. "Our son," he said in wonder. "Delilah, our son." They named him James, after Benjamin's father, and if Benjamin had been protective before, it was nothing compared to how he was now. He fashioned a cradle that rocked by the fireplace, positioned so the baby would always be in light and warmth. He carved toys with his skilled hands and sang to James in his rough voice, old songs his own father had taught him. Delilah discovered that motherhood left little room for fear of the dark. When James cried in the night, she rose automatically to feed him, and it did not matter if the lamps had burned low or if she needed to tend the fire. Her child needed her, and that was all that mattered. Benjamin noticed. "You are too tired to be afraid," he said one morning, bouncing James gently while Delilah tried to eat breakfast with her eyes half closed. "I am too busy to be afraid," she corrected. "And I have finally realized something. The darkness cannot hurt me. It never could. The fear was the only danger, and the fear is just a feeling. It cannot actually harm me or my son." "No," Benjamin agreed, "but I will still keep the fires burning. Not because you need me to, but because I want to. Because keeping you and James surrounded by light and warmth is how I show my love." Summer bloomed across the mountains, and James grew from a tiny, helpless newborn into a baby with alert eyes and a ready smile. Delilah's body healed, and life settled into new rhythms. Benjamin would carry James in a sling across his chest while he did chores, talking to the baby about everything he was doing. Delilah would nurse James while sitting by the window, watching the play of light on the peaks. In August, they had a visitor. Delilah was hanging laundry when she heard a horse approaching. Benjamin was out checking traps, and she felt a moment of concern before she recognized the woman riding up as Margaret, Thomas's sister. "Margaret," Delilah said in surprise, settling James more securely on her hip. "What are you doing here?" Margaret dismounted and smiled, though it looked a bit strained. "I wanted to see how you were, and to apologize for my brother, though I know it is not my place." "There is nothing to apologize for. I was the one who left him at the altar." "Yes, but he should have never made you feel you had to choose between security and being truly seen." Margaret looked at James. "May I?" Delilah handed over her son, and Margaret cooed over him with genuine affection. "He is beautiful. You look happy, Delilah, truly happy." "I am." "Benjamin is a good man, the best man." "Thomas married someone else 2 months after you left," Margaret said. "A widow with her own money. I think that was what he wanted all along, really, someone who fit neatly into his plans." She looked up from James. "But when I saw how heartbroken he was, not over losing you, but over the scandal, I knew you had made the right choice." Benjamin came up the path then, and Delilah introduced him to Margaret. He was polite but protective, positioning himself slightly between the two women until he was sure the visitor meant no harm. When he understood that Margaret was a friend, he relaxed and invited her to stay for supper. Over the meal, Margaret told them news from Denver City. The town was growing, new businesses opening. There had been a fire on Larimer Street, but no one was hurt, and Thomas was expecting a child with his new wife. "I am glad he found happiness," Delilah said, and she meant it. Thomas had not been a bad man, just the wrong man. If she had married him, she would have spent her life trying to be smaller, quieter, less than she was. With Benjamin, she was free to be exactly herself. Margaret left the next morning with promises to visit again, and Delilah stood with James in her arms, watching her go. "I made the right choice," she said to Benjamin, who came to stand beside her. "For both of us, you did," he agreed. The years that followed were full and rich. When James was 2, a second baby arrived, a girl they named Sarah with dark hair like her mother and her father's steady eyes. 3 years after that, another boy called Peter, who was loud and wild from the moment he entered the world. The cabin expanded with the family. Benjamin added 2 more rooms, working through the summer months to give the children their own space. And every night, without fail, he lit the lamps and built the fires, even though Delilah no longer needed him to. "Why do you still do it?" she asked one evening when the children were asleep, and they sat together by the hearth, her head on his shoulder. "I have not been afraid of the dark for years now." "I know," Benjamin said, "but it started as a promise to you and it became something more. It is how I mark the end of each day, a moment to be grateful for this life we have built. And besides, I like the ritual of it. Checking each lamp, adjusting each wick, It is like saying a prayer." She tilted her head up to kiss him. "I love you, Benjamin Zimmerman. I loved you that first night when you kept vigil outside my door. I loved you when you came back to Denver City to give me a choice. And I love you more with every day that passes. And I love you, Delilah. You were so brave, even when you felt most afraid. You came west alone, and when you found you were marrying the wrong man, you had the courage to choose differently. You gave me a family when I thought I would live out my days alone on this mountain. You gave me everything." The children grew. James became a serious boy who loved to read and learn, and Benjamin would sit with him for hours teaching him to read tracks and weather signs. Sarah was fearless, always climbing trees and riding her pony too fast, giving Delilah heart palpitations regularly. Peter was the charmer, able to coax extra cookies and later bedtimes with his winning smile. And through it all, through illnesses and injuries, through harsh winters and dry summers, through the joys and struggles of raising children in the wilderness, Benjamin kept the fires burning. Every single night as darkness fell, he would light the lamps that ringed their homestead, creating a circle of warmth and safety. When James was 12, he asked his father about it. "Why do you light so many lamps? We have enough with just a few." Benjamin looked at Delilah and she nodded. They had decided long ago to be honest with the children about her fear, to teach them that everyone had struggles and that love meant supporting each other through them. "When I first met your mother," Benjamin said, "she was very afraid of the dark. Something from her childhood made darkness terrifying for her. So I promised I would always keep the lamps burning, that she would never have to face the night alone. She is not afraid anymore, has not been for years. But I keep the promise anyway because some promises are meant to be kept forever." James considered this, his young face serious. "That is romantic," he said finally, and Sarah made gagging noises until Peter started laughing. But later, Delilah found James carefully trimming the wicks on the exterior lamps, and she knew he understood. Love was not just grand gestures. It was showing up every day, doing the small things that mattered, keeping your promises. When Delilah was 43 and Benjamin 49, their last child arrived unexpectedly, a late blessing they had not anticipated. Another girl, named Ruth after the midwife who had helped bring all their children safely into the world. The older children doted on their baby sister, and Benjamin would walk the floor with her at night, singing the same songs he had sung to James 20 years before. "Our family is complete," Benjamin said one evening, watching Delilah nurse Ruth by the firelight while their older children played a noisy game at the table. "It is perfect," Delilah agreed. "Though I could never have imagined this life when I was on that stagecoach, so afraid of the coming darkness." "The darkness brought us together," Benjamin pointed out. "If you had not been afraid, I would not have stood vigil. You would have married Thomas Mercer, and I would have returned to my lonely cabin. Fear led you to your destiny." It was a strange thought, but perhaps true. Perhaps the very thing she had struggled against her whole life had been necessary to lead her to this moment, this family, this love. The children grew and eventually began to leave. James went to study at a college back east, determined to be a teacher. Sarah married a rancher from the valley and moved 10 miles away, close enough to visit often. Peter became a trapper like his father, building his own cabin on the far side of the mountain. The years brought sorrows as well as joys. Ruth, the midwife, passed away in her sleep at 83. Margaret died of a fever, and Benjamin and Delilah made the trip to Denver City for her funeral, where they saw Thomas briefly, an old man with grandchildren of his own. There was no awkwardness between them, only a peaceful acknowledgement of the lives they had each lived. And through it all, Benjamin kept the fires burning. His hair turned gray, then white. His powerful frame grew thinner, though he remained strong. Delilah's dark hair became silver, and her face lined with years of sun and smiles. But every evening he still lit the lamps, still built up the fire. When Delilah was 68, she woke one morning to find Benjamin had not risen yet. This was unusual enough to alarm her, and when she turned to him, she saw immediately that something was wrong. His breathing was labored, his color poor. "Benjamin," she said, shaking him gently. "Benjamin, wake up." He opened his eyes and she saw pain there. "Something is wrong," he managed. "My chest." She sent Ruth, who at 25 had moved back home to help care for her aging parents, to fetch the doctor from the settlement. But she knew, even as Ruth galloped away, that it was serious. Benjamin gripped her hand. "The lamps," he said. "Tonight you will need to light them yourself." "Do not talk nonsense," she said, trying to keep the fear from her voice. "You will be fine, and you will light them yourself as you always do." But he was not fine. The doctor came and confirmed what Delilah already knew in her heart. Benjamin's heart was failing, weakened by years of hard work and high altitude. There was nothing to be done except make him comfortable. Their children came. James from the east, arriving 3 days later. Sarah from her ranch. Peter from across the mountain. They gathered around their father, and he spoke to each of them, giving advice and blessing, telling them how proud he was of the people they had become. On the 5th night after Benjamin had fallen ill, as twilight approached, he gripped Delilah's hand. "You need to light the lamps," he said. "I cannot tonight." "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I will, I promise." "I always kept them burning for you," he said, his voice growing weaker. "Every night, like I promised. Did I do well?" "You did perfectly," she whispered. "You gave me everything. You showed me I was strong. You loved me exactly as I was. You gave me a family and a home and a life more beautiful than I ever dreamed possible." "The dark is not so bad," Benjamin said, his eyes drifting closed. "Not at the end. It is peaceful, like rest." "Do not leave me," Delilah begged, though she knew she was being selfish. "Please, Benjamin." "I am not ready." "You are ready. You have been ready for 30 years. He opened his eyes one more time, looking at her with all the love that had sustained them through the decades. "Light the lamps, my love. Keep the fires burning. Live." He died as the sun set, with his wife's hand in his and his children surrounding him. And as darkness fell, Delilah stood, her heart shattered, and did what needed to be done. She lit the lamps, every single one, circling the homestead with light. She built the fire high and warm. And she kept the darkness at bay, not because she was afraid of it anymore, but because it was what Benjamin would have wanted. It was how they marked their days, how they said their prayers, how they loved each other. The funeral was attended by neighbors from the settlement, by friends Benjamin had made over 40 years in these mountains. He was buried on the hill behind the cabin, with a view of the peaks he had loved. And that night, and every night after, Delilah lit the lamps. The first year without Benjamin was the hardest. There were so many moments when she would turn to tell him something and find him not there. So many times she would wake in the night reaching for him. But she had their children and grandchildren, and they came often to check on her. "Come live with me," Sarah urged. "You should not be alone up here." "I am not alone," Delilah said, and it was true. Benjamin's presence filled the cabin, and every evening when she lit the lamps she felt him with her. She lived on in the cabin for another 8 years, tending her garden, welcoming her grandchildren who would come to stay for weeks in the summer. She taught them the things Benjamin had taught her: how to read the weather, how to move quietly through the forest, how to trim a lamp wick and build a fire that would burn through the night. And every evening, as she had for 48 years, she lit the lamps and made the cabin bright. When Delilah was 76, She woke one morning and knew her time was short. She could feel it in her bones, in her breath. She sent word to her children, and they came, gathering around her as they had around Benjamin. "Do not be sad," she told them. "I have had such a good life. Your father gave me everything, and you have given me more than I ever deserved." "You deserve everything good, Mama," James said, his voice thick with tears. That evening, as the sun began to set, Delilah looked at her family. "I want to light the lamps one more time," she said. "Help me up." They tried to protest, but she was insistent. With Sarah on one side and Ruth on the other, she made her way around the cabin, lighting each lamp. She was slow and her hands shook, but she lit them all. Then she stood in the center of the circle of light she and Benjamin had created and maintained for nearly half a century. "This was his promise to me," she said, "that I would never have to face the darkness alone, and he kept it, every single night until he could not anymore. And then I kept it for him and for myself and for all of you. This is what love looks like, showing up every day, keeping your promises, making light in the darkness." They helped her back to bed, and she lay there, surrounded by her children, watching the lamps burn steady and bright. As her eyes grew heavy and her breathing slowed, she thought she saw Benjamin standing in the doorway, young and strong as he had been that first night when he had knocked on her door at the trading post. "I kept the fires burning," she whispered. "Every night, just like you taught me." "I know," Benjamin said, and he was smiling. "You did perfectly. Now come with me. The darkness is not frightening anymore." He held out his hand and she took it, and together they stepped into the light that lay beyond the lamps, beyond the fire, beyond the world they had built together. Her children found her in the morning, peaceful in her sleep, with a slight smile on her face. And that evening, as they prepared for the funeral, James lit the lamps around the cabin as his mother had done, as his father had done before her. "We should keep doing this," he said to his siblings. "We should keep the tradition." And they did. Through the generations that followed, Benjamin and Delilah's descendants kept the practice of lighting lamps around their homes as darkness fell. Most of them did not remember the original reason, did not know about the bride who had been afraid of the dark and the mountain man who had loved her enough to keep the fires burning every single night. But they knew it meant something about family, about love, about keeping promises. And in the settlement that grew into a town, and in Denver City, where Delilah had almost married the wrong man, people would sometimes see the lights blazing on the mountain and remember the love story that had started with fear and ended with a lifetime of light. They told it to their children and grandchildren, and it became legend. The bride who was afraid of the dark and the mountain man who showed her she was brave, because that was the truth of it in the end. Benjamin had not saved Delilah from her fear. He had given her the safety and love she needed to save herself. He had kept the fires burning until she learned she could keep them herself. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift one person can give another, the knowledge that she was stronger than she knew and that she was loved exactly as she was. The cabin still stands on the mountain, now a historical site that people visit in the summer months. And every evening, the caretakers light lamps around the homestead, keeping alive the promise Benjamin made to Delilah in 1867. Because some promises, some loves, some lights are meant to burn forever, pushing back the darkness not just for one frightened bride, but for everyone who needs to know that the night is not so terrible when someone loves you enough to keep the fires burning.